If you've ever wondered how a war could start with a lie, this is the moment to look at. Just hours before Nazi Germany invaded Poland, German operatives staged an attack on their own soil and blamed Poland. On the night of August 31st, 1939, SS forces dressed in Polish army uniforms stormed a small radio station in the city of Gleiwitz, near the border. They broadcast a short message in Polish, urging anti-German resistance, then left behind a corpse in uniform. He was a concentration camp prisoner, used to make the scene look more convincing. The entire event was carefully staged to appear as a Polish assault. This wasn't a one-off. It was part of a larger campaign called Operation Himmler, a coordinated set of fake attacks designed to portray Germany as the victim of cross-border aggression. The truth is that no Polish forces were involved, and the deception didn't fool those abroad and was widely dismissed by foreign governments. But that really wasn't the goal. You see, the show was meant for the Germans, and it gave the Führer a justification. The next morning, German troops invaded Poland, and World War II began. The Gleiwitz incident is probably the clearest, most well-documented example of a government using a false flag to launch a major war. In 1931, the Japanese military used a small explosion to trigger a full-scale invasion. The event took place near Mukden, now Shenyang, in northeast China. On the night of September 18th, Japanese troops from the Kwantung Army detonated a small charge near a section of railway owned by Japan's South Manchuria Railway Company. The damage was minor and the tracks remained unusable, but that didn't matter. Within hours, Japanese forces used the explosion as justification to seize Chinese territory across Manchuria. The operation was entirely orchestrated by junior officers without prior approval from Tokyo. But rather than punish those involved, the Japanese government backed the invasion after the fact. Within months, Japan had installed a puppet regime in the region, called Manchukuo. The League of Nations investigated the incident and concluded that the explosion had been staged. Japan responded by withdrawing from the League entirely. The Mukden incident is widely regarded as one of the earliest well-documented false flag events of the 20th century, one that kicked off Japan's broader military expansion across East Asia. On November 26, 1939, artillery shells fell near the Soviet village of Mainila, close to the Finnish border. The Soviet Union quickly blamed Finland for the attack, claiming it had fired on Red Army troops. But multiple observers, including Finnish officials and foreign analysts, concluded the shelling had been carried out by Soviet forces themselves. The incident came just days after the Soviet military had moved significant forces toward the border. Within days of the shelling, the USSR broke off its non-aggression pact with Finland and launched a full invasion, beginning the Winter War. The shelling provided the political cover needed to justify a military campaign that had been planned in advance. Decades later, declassified Soviet materials and independent research confirmed what Finland had claimed all along: that Finnish forces were not even in range of the village when the shells landed. This wouldn't be the last false flag for the Soviet Union. But the Mainila shelling set the tone for how the Soviet Union would handle similar narratives in future conflicts. During the Cold War, the U.S. military drafted a plan that shocked even the president. Known as Operation Northwoods, it proposed a series of staged attacks on American civilians and military assets, all designed to create justification for a war against Cuba. The document, developed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962, outlined multiple scenarios: blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay, staging a mock funeral for American victims, faking the shooting down of a civilian airliner, and carrying out bombings on American soil. Each act would be blamed on Fidel Castro's regime. What makes this especially striking is how far the proposal advanced. It wasn't the work of fringe officers, it came from the top of the Pentagon. But when presented to President John F. Kennedy, he rejected it outright. The plan was never carried out and remained classified for decades. When the documents were finally declassified in the 1990s, they revealed just how far the U.S. military was willing to go to provoke public support for a war. Thankfully, it was never put into action. In September 1999, a series of deadly apartment bombings shook Russian cities, taking the lives of over 300 civilians and injuring hundreds more. The attacks were immediately blamed on Chechen separatists, and they became the justification for launching the Second Chechen War. The bombings also played a central role in elevating Vladimir Putin, then a relatively unknown figure, to national leadership. But questions surrounding the final bombing attempt at Ryazan have never gone away. On September 22nd, residents of the city of Ryazan spotted suspicious activity near their building. Police discovered sacks initially identified as containing explosives in the basement and arrested 3 men, who turned out to be agents of the SFB, Russia's security service. The government later claimed the operation had been a training exercise, but the timing and nature of the event raised serious doubts. No Chechen group ever took credit for the bombings. Independent investigations were blocked, and key figures who pushed for inquiries, including lawmakers and journalists, later came to untimely ends under suspicious circumstances, or were forced into exile. While the official narrative is that Chechen terrorists were responsible, a number of Russian and international observers believe the FSB may have orchestrated the attacks to rally public support and legitimize military intervention. In the early 1950s, Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the country's oil industry, which had been largely controlled by British interests. This move alarmed both the United Kingdom and the United States, who saw it as a threat to Western influence in the region. In response, British intelligence and the CIA launched a joint covert operation to remove Mossadegh from power, known in the U.S. as Operation TPAJAX. The plan involved political manipulation, propaganda, and staged violence. CIA-backed agents posed as communists and organized attacks on religious figures and symbols in Tehran. These false flag actions were designed to create fear of a communist uprising and erode public support for Mossadegh. The campaign succeeded. On August 19, 1953, the coup culminated in Mossadegh's arrest and the return of the Shah, who ruled with Western backing for another 25 years. Operation TPAJAX remained classified for decades. But CIA documents released in 2000 and 2013 confirmed the extent of U.S. and British involvement. This operation is often cited as a turning point in modern Middle Eastern history, not only for its consequences in Iran, but for how it demonstrated the use of covert false flag tactics in shaping global politics. In early 2014, unmarked armed men appeared in Crimea. They wore no insignia, spoke fluent Russian, and moved with military precision. While they claimed to be local self-defense forces, their uniforms and tactics pointed clearly to Russian special operations units. Within weeks, these forces had seized government buildings, surrounded Ukrainian bases, and enabled a controversial referendum that led to Russia's annexation of the region. At the same time, in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region, armed groups began occupying public buildings and declaring breakaway republics. Russia denied any involvement, insisting the uprising was organic. However, phone intercepts, captured weapons, and independent reporting revealed strong coordination between these separatists and Russian operatives. Russia framed the actions as grassroots uprisings by Ukrainian citizens, when in reality they were heavily directed, armed, and supported by Russian state actors. This gave Moscow cover to claim it was responding to a local call for protection, not waging a cross-border campaign. The strategy worked in the short term. Crimea was annexed with little resistance, and the conflict in eastern Ukraine dragged on for years, all while official Russian involvement was denied. In 1954, Israeli military intelligence launched a covert operation in Egypt that would later become known as the Lavon Affair. The plan involved recruiting Egyptian Jews to plant bombs in American, British, and Egyptian civilian targets, including libraries and movie theaters. The attacks were intended to be blamed on Muslim groups or communists, with the goal of destabilizing Egypt and convincing Western powers to maintain their military presence in the Suez Canal zone. The operation failed when one of the operatives was caught attempting to plant a device. A broader network was exposed, and several participants were arrested. During interrogation and trial, the link to Israeli intelligence became increasingly clear. The political fallout in Israel was significant. Defense Minister Pinchas Lavon was forced to resign, though it remained unclear whether he had directly authorized the mission. For years, the Israeli government refused to acknowledge the operation, but it eventually came to light through public investigations and later admissions. In June 2017, a ransomware attack swept across Ukrainian infrastructure and quickly spread to companies around the world. The malware, known as NotPetya, locked the computer systems and demanded payment, but researchers quickly realized it wasn't designed to unlock anything. Unlike typical ransomware, NotPetya had no real recovery mechanism. It was built to destroy. The attack began by posing as a software update for a Ukrainian accounting program. From there, it infected financial systems, government servers, transportation networks, and utilities. Though it affected multiple countries, Ukraine was clearly the prime target. Initial reports treated the event as a criminal cyberattack, but further analysis by cybersecurity firms and intelligence agencies traced the code's origins to Russian military hackers. They had used a familiar digital signature to make it appear like a financially motivated operation, when in fact it was a state-sponsored act of sabotage. The use of fake ransomware tactics was a new, modern, digital form of a false flag, masking the true source and motive behind the operation. NotPetya caused billions in damage globally, but its clearest purpose was to disrupt Ukrainians' economy and send a message without triggering open war. In the aftermath of the Russian Civil War, Soviet intelligence carried out one of the earliest and most sophisticated false flag operations of the 20th century. The Cheka, the predecessor to the KGB, created a fake anti-Bolshevik resistance group called the Monarchist Union of Central Russia. On the surface, it appeared to be an underground network trying to restore the old regime. In reality, it was actually run entirely by the Soviet state. The operation's goal was to identify and neutralize real opposition, both inside and outside the country. Exiled Russian nobles, military officers, and foreign intelligence services were drawn in, believing they were supporting a genuine resistance. Some even traveled back into Soviet territory, only to be arrested or executed. The deception lasted for 5 years and was remarkably successful. Hundreds of anti-Bolsheviks were lured into traps, and foreign powers were misled about the strength of internal dissent. Unlike most false flags, which involve staged attacks or provocations, Operation Trust was about creating a fictional movement. It demonstrated how a regime could shape the narrative not through violence, but through prolonged and carefully managed deception. During the final years of apartheid, South Africa's military intelligence ran covert operations designed to undermine the African National Congress and its allies. One of the key units involved was the Civil Cooperation Bureau, CCB. Among its missions were false flag attacks meant to discredit anti-apartheid activities. In some cases, operatives staged bombings or shootings and made them appear as though they were carried out by the ANC or its supporters. The intent was to sow fear, erode public sympathy for movement, and justify harsh security crackdowns. These operations came to light during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings in the mid-1990s. Former operatives testified about staged incidents, targeted assassinations, and psychological warfare campaigns carried out under government direction. Unlike many false flag operations that remain somewhat disputed, the CCB's activities were revealed by those who carried them out. Throughout the 2010s, Russian state-backed hackers used a new kind of false flag, not on the battlefield but in cyberspace. These operations didn't just attack foreign systems. They tried to shift blame by posing as entirely different adversaries. In several confirmed cases, Russian hacking groups embedded false metadata and mimicked the tactics of other actors, particularly Islamic extremists or Iranian hackers. The goal was to obscure the true source of cyberattacks from security researchers and governments. One example involved a cyber campaign against political targets in Europe and the United States. Researchers discovered Russian-linked attackers had deliberately inserted Arabic phrases into their malware and structured their code to resemble that of ISIS-affiliated groups. In other cases, Russian groups mimicked Iranian tools and infrastructure to hide their involvement in espionage campaigns. The result was a form of digital misdirection that made it harder to hold anyone accountable, even when the fingerprints were eventually uncovered. During Algeria's brutal civil war in the 1990s, thousands of civilians perished in village massacres unofficially blamed on Islamist insurgents. But as the war continued, survivors, defectors, and international observers began to question that narrative. Some of the most horrific attacks, including the attacks at Beit Halla and Rais, were carried out with military precision, often in areas surrounded by government checkpoints, with no response from nearby security forces. Over time, former officers and diplomats came forward, alleging that elements of the Algerian military and intelligence services had orchestrated or permitted it in order to delegitimize the Islamist opposition. The goal, they claimed, was to convince the population and international partners that the government's violent crackdown was necessary. Although full accountability has never been established, testimony from insiders and reports by human rights organizations suggest that at least some atrocities were false flag operations. In other words, they were attacks designed to appear as extremist violence, but carried out, enabled, or deliberately ignored by the state itself. Between 2019 and 2020, Israeli cybersecurity analysts uncovered a hacking campaign targeting government networks. At first glance, the operation appeared to come from Iran. The code was laced with Farsi language commands and techniques commonly associated with known Iranian cyber groups. But something didn't add up. Further investigation by FireEye and the Israeli Defense Forces pointed elsewhere. China. Analysts concluded that the attacks had copied Iranian methods on purpose, deliberately crafting their tools and tactics to resemble those of Tehran. This misdirection was a form of cyber false flag, meant to shift blame and avoid detection. The campaign targeted infrastructure and sensitive political systems. And while the impact was limited, the strategy revealed a more advanced layer of cyber warfare, where China wasn't just hiding its identity, it was framing someone else. This case stood out because it demonstrated the evolution of digital deception. In previous years, attribution might have been murky, but here it was actively manipulated, not just obscuring the origin of the attack, but trying to create a diplomatic diversion at another nation's expense. In August 2008, conflict broke out between Georgia and Russian-backed separatists in the breakaway region of South Ossetia. Officially, Russia claimed it intervened only after Georgian forces attacked civilians, but international monitors and later investigations suggest a more complex picture, one where provocations were carefully staged to justify a large-scale military response. In the weeks leading up to the war, separatist groups in South Ossetia increased their shelling of Georgian positions, often in civilian areas. Russia had already massed troops near the border and was prepared to move quickly once hostilities escalated. When Georgia responded with force, Russia immediately launched a wide invasion, including strikes deep into Georgian territory. While Russia denied orchestrating events, the timing and preparation raised doubts. Western analysts argued that the provocations had been calculated, designed to provoke a reaction that could be framed as Georgian aggression. Though not a classic false flag involving disguise or planted evidence, the manipulation of events to create a justification for war fits the broader pattern of blame shifting and strategic deception. In 2002, Macedonian police took the lives of 7 men near the capital, claiming they were foreign Islamist militants plotting terrorist attacks. The operation was initially praised as a counterterrorism success, but within months, the truth began to unravel. Investigations revealed that the men were not terrorists at all. They were undocumented migrants, some reportedly lured into the country under false pretenses. Macedonian security forces had staged the event, planting weapons and fabricating evidence to make it appear as though a major attack had been foiled. The motive was political. Officials hoped to demonstrate their commitment to the global war on terror and strengthen ties with Western allies, particularly the United States. The revelation sparked a major scandal, leading to resignations and public outcry. This false flag operation was eventually acknowledged through court proceedings by the Macedonian government after the facts emerged. The case reminds us that even smaller states have used staged events to manipulate perception and carry out their own false flag operations. Thank you for watching the video and making it to the end. Going through these one by one, what sticks out the most is how different they all are. Some were full-scale military invasions. Others were just a few guys planting a bomb or spoofing code. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it backfired. But what's your take? Do you think we missed anything major? Or maybe a better question, with these operations in mind, are there any historical events that you now see differently after hearing these examples? And maybe the bigger question, how do you even know what to support or oppose when facts about a situation could have all been made up? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you liked the video, please give us a like and subscribe so you know when a new video comes out. Thanks again. See you next time.